Good morning again, class. We are going to finish the Johannine letters today. We'll be looking at 3rd John. It only has 14 verses. This letter is not written to a church, it's actually written to a specific person. The man's name is Gaius, and we'll talk more about him in just a second. But this is really one of the few precious fragments of early Christian correspondence that have been found. Its spiritual character is very evident. It's all kind of speculation about who wrote it. We know John did, so we're not going to worry about what any scholars think about that. Let's look at Gaius, though. He seems to have been a wealthy man because John, who really only identified himself as the elder in this letter, but he didn't think it would impose unduly on Gaius to host some traveling preachers for a short time. Maybe that John converted Gaius since he calls Gaius his child in the faith. The name Gaius occurs 3 other times in the New Testament. The first is a Christian Gaius. He is mentioned in Macedonia as a traveling companion of Paul. That's in Acts 19:29. One chapter later, there's a Gaius from Derbe. He's one of Paul's 7 traveling companions who waited for him in Troas. Let's see, the next Gaius mentioned resided in Corinth, and he was one of only a few people baptized by Paul who founded the church in that city, that's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 1:14. And then lastly is the Gaius that's referred to in 3rd John. Gaius is referred to in the final greeting portion of the epistle to the Romans as Paul's host and also the host of the whole church in whatever city Paul was writing from at the time, which was probably Corinth. But there's no reason to suppose that the Gaius here in 3rd John is any of those guys. Gaius, well, it's not specified where he lived. It's likely he belonged to a church somewhere in Roman Asia, which today would be Western Turkey. The writer, who was evidently a traveling preacher, Demetrius, was probably also the bearer of the letter. We'll talk more about Demetrius in a minute. John apparently needed to appeal directly to Gaius for support of Demetrius, since the church was dominated by a man named Diotrephes, who did not extend a welcoming hand to traveling brethren. This Demetrius is only mentioned in 3rd John, and as I stated earlier, he's probably the one, or is likely to have been the person that delivered the letter from John. And John says he is well known for his commitment to truth and has well-deserved praise from all who know him. Now, this guy Diotrephes is another cut from a different bolt of cloth. Diotrephes' name means nourished by Jupiter. I don't know if there's any significance to that. Probably in that culture there was. Not only was he ambitious, he was proud, he was disrespectful of apostolic authority, he was rebellious, he was inhospitable. the author of the letter says Diotrephes tried to hinder those desiring to show hospitality to the brothers and expel those from the congregation. Not even the location of Diotrephes' church can be determined from the letter. It's debatable whether these bad feelings between John and this fellow that are expressed in this letter are based on a theological dispute or a clash of competing ecclesiastical authorities or a disagreement about financial responsibilities for missions, or maybe John just didn't like him. But Gaius was a member of the same church that Diotrephes was ruling over. So it's possible he might have run the risk of incurring Diotrephes' wrath as well. But Gaius was a man of some means, and he would not easily be driven from the church. The suggestion that Gaius belonged to a different church than did Diotrephes does not seem probable in light of verse 9, which we'll look at shortly, with its simple reference to the church. Diotrephes may possibly be an early and unfavorable example of a monarchical bishop. Out of the earliest ecclesiastical situation in which the body of elders of equal authority ruled the congregations, a system emerged in which one man assumed prominence over the other elders and became the bishop. This process most often have happened almost imperceptibly when a man of strong character gained ascendancy over the rest of the leadership. But in the church to which Gaius evidently belonged, the process had led to the prominence of a self-willed authoritarian individual. Diotrephes' reasons for refusing to receive traveling brethren were not spelled out specifically by John. No doubt he rationalized his conduct in some way, but the apostle made it plain that what Diotrephes did was wrong. He expected to correct the situation when he arrived in person. That would be John. Okay, let's begin looking at this third book of John by reading the first 4 verses.
The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth.
The elder briefly greeted the recipient of this letter affectionately. The salutation is unlike most New Testament epistles in that it lacks the usual wish for grace and peace. However, when he says farewell, he says peace to you. My dear friend in the first verse translates in the Greek to the beloved, related to the verb which comes from agape. In the spirit of Christian love, the spirit of Christian love prevailed in the elder's attitude toward Gaius. It's precisely this same spirit which was to dictate Gaius' attitude toward traveling preachers such as Demetrius. The apostle's love for Gaius was in the truth. That is, it was genuine and in accord with God's truth. In the same way, Gaius was to express his Christian love by hospitality that supported the truth. As in John's 2 earlier epistles, the thought of this letter is dominated by concern for truth and love in the Christian experience. Verse 2. The elder was pleased with Gaius' spiritual condition and wished that he might get along equally well on a physical level. As verses 2 through 6 show, Gaius was evidently an outstanding spiritual man. The words, "I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you," are not a mere conventional expression of good wishes. John was concerned for the temporal well-being of others and not only for their spiritual welfare. The elder was glad to have learned from some of the brothers of Gaius' loyalty to the truth. The words, "tell about your faithfulness to truth," somewhat paraphrase the Greek, which more literally reads, "witness to your truth." The apostle was saying he had heard that Gaius was a man of the truth, and quite possibly the brothers who brought this testimony to John had enjoyed Gaius' hospitality, the same thing which the writer apparently urged on behalf of Demetrius. The words, "and how you continue to walk in the truth," elaborate what the brothers had said about Gaius. Gaius' style of life, his walk, was consistent with God's truth. Verse 4, nothing made John happier than to hear that his children were walking in truth. It is possible that by referring to Gaius as one of his children, John meant that Gaius was a convert of John's. After praising the general conduct of Gaius, the writer moved directly to a matter that concerned him. Those who go forth to preach the truth need support of Christians in the places where they travel. Unlike Diotrephes, Gaius gave this kind of assistance, and the apostle wished to ensure him that this was the proper course of action. This contrasts with the emphasis in 2 John 10 and 11 on not giving hospitality to false teachers. So, false teachers you were not to be hospitable to. You weren't to let them in your house. For people who were preaching the truth, you were to welcome them and to take care of them while they were in your area. Let's look at verses 5 through 8 now.
Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such people, so that we may work together for the truth. Addressing
Gaius again as beloved, the writer commended his hospitality to Christians who came his way. The New International Version adopts a form of text in which brothers and strangers are equated, but many manuscripts read for the brothers and for strangers. If we read it that way, the writer would refer to the traveling preachers as brothers, while also asserting that Gaius' hospitality didn't have to stop there, but could be extended to strangers. About this course of conduct, the apostle declared, "You are faithful in what you are doing." That is to say, such conduct is praiseworthy because it is an act of fidelity to the truth of God. Verse 6, the report of Gaius' hospitality had reached the church where John now was. This might have been the church at Jerusalem if the epistle was written before AD 66. Again, AD 66 is when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. If it was a church in Jerusalem, Gaius would have been pleased to know that the highly respected Jerusalem congregation had heard of his service to the servants of God. But John followed up this encouragement with an exhortation. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. The force of these words from the apostle was to enjoin on Gaius an open-handed generosity toward the traveling brethren. Nothing less than such generosity would be worthy of God, who expressed his supreme generosity in the giving of his Son. Verse 7. The reason for such behavior is that those whom Gaius should help have gone out for the sake of the name. The name here, of course, is that of Jesus, which was now exalted above every name. To go out on behalf of that name was a supreme honor. Naturally, it was inappropriate for those who did so to seek support from those who did not believe or honor that name. So the Lord's servants went out, receiving no help from the pagans. Even in the present day, there is something unseemly in a preacher of the gospel soliciting funds from people to whom he offers God free salvation. Verse 8. But the fact that faithful Christian preachers sought no help from the unsaved meant that Christians were under a special obligation to assist them by extending the help they needed. Christians such as Gaius could work together for the truth. This last phrase might be better rendered, be fellow workers with the truth. That's the New American Standard Bible translation. The thought of partnership with what truth accomplishes in people's hearts and lives, it was a noble objective for Gaius to follow. Now John's going to have something to say about Diotrephes. Let's look at 9 through 11.
I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God.
Not everyone shared Gaius's worthy objective. John stated, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. The simple reference to the church suggests strongly that this was the church to which Gaius belonged. It sounds as if Gaius may not have known about John's letter to the church. It may well be that Diotrephes had suppressed it and kept it from the church's attention. Diotrephes, John observed, was motivated by love for preeminence in the church. He was not the last church leader to be so motivated. Temptation to use a role in the Christian assembly as a means of self-gratification remains a real one of all servants of God that they need to resist. As a result of his personal ambitions, Diotrephes resisted the apostles' wishes. The expression, will have nothing to do with us, may also be translated, does not welcome us as guests. The apostle was probably thinking of Diotrephes' refusal to accord hospitality to the traveling brethren who came to the church, and he took Diotrephes' rejection of the brothers as a rejection of himself. Quite possibly, Diotrephes did not present himself as a personal opponent of John, but in rejecting John's representatives, he was rejecting John. Verse 10. The writer, however, knew that he could deal with this problem in person. I bet he could. So, if I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, says John. This assertion should probably be taken as an understatement. The verb used here means basically to remind or call to mind. And the whole phrase might be translated, I will call his work to mind, with the manifest implication that Diotrephes' works would be dealt with appropriately. Diotrephes, the writer asserted, had been guilty of three things. First, he was against us with evil, bringing charges against us, false charges with evil words. No doubt the self-willed leader did his best to tear down the reputation of those whom he had not prepared to receive, and it may refer chiefly to John's representative. But Diotrephes went beyond mere talk, wrong as that was. Not satisfied with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers. This was his second wrongdoing. His malicious prattle, no doubt, laid the groundwork for actual refusal of hospitality, in contrast to Gaius' hospitality. And third, like many other ecclesiastical dictators since his time, Diotrephes did all he could to enforce his will on others. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. So, using his self-proclaimed authority, having a prominent position, he forced other believers to be inhospitable, and if they weren't, even prevented them from gathering with the church. Perhaps Gaius already knew most of these facts. It's likely that John was indirectly reminding him of the potential difficulties he faced in welcoming men who served the truth. But Gaius' obvious dedication to hospitality suggests that he was a man of some means and probably in a good position to resist the authority of Diotrephes. He would be further encouraged by John's promise that he would deal with Diotrephes when he arrived. Verse 11. At any rate, Gaius was not to imitate what is evil, but to do what is good. Diotrephes' behavior was to be avoided, not copied. One's conduct clearly reflects one's relationship with God. Anyone who does what is good is from God. The words "from God" translate in the Greek a phrase which occurs a number of times in 1 John. It suggests that the source of one's actions or attitude is in God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. That's 1 John 3:6. Evil never arises from a real spiritual perception of God, but is always a product of darkness of heart and blindness toward God. John was not questioning Diotrephes' salvation, but he was affirming that his conduct manifested real blindness toward God. Gaius was to be careful to shun such experience as this. Let's look at verse 12.
Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true.
If Gaius would indeed imitate what is good, he would extend hospitality to Demetrius. This is not explicitly requested, but seems an obvious implication of John's recommendation of Demetrius. In accordance with the Jewish laws of witness, the apostle adduced a threefold testimony to the character of Demetrius. First, he was well spoken of by everyone who knew him. Second, he was also vouched for by the truth itself. His character and doctrine were in such conformity with that truth that the truth itself virtually spoke on his behalf. And thirdly, John wrote, "We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true." John himself could personally attest to the worth of this man. Thus, Gaius had no reason to hesitate showing Demetrius the kind of hospitality he had shown others. The Demetrius in this letter is not to be confused with the Demetrius of Acts 19:24, as that Demetrius was an enemy of the gospel. We close 3 John by looking at the final 2 verses, 13 and 14.
I have much to write to you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends here send their greetings. Greet the friends there by name.
John was now finished with what he wished to say in this short letter, but he still had much to write to Gaius. He could have said much more in the writing, but as he had also written in 2 John, he hoped to be able to visit soon to communicate those things face to face. Verse 14, the apostle wished Gaius peace and passed on greetings from the friends here. Similarly, he wanted Gaius to greet friends there by name. He used the term friends twice in these closing statements, and that's perhaps one final reminder to Gaius that Christians in every place are or should be a network of friends who are ready to help one another whenever the need arises. It is part of the genius of Christianity that one can meet people whom he has never seen before in places far from home and discover through a shared faith an immediate bond of friendship. I don't know if y'all have had it happen. I have been in places like a doctor's office or other places when someone entered the place, and I immediately knew that this person was a Christian. They had not spoken. We had not discussed Christianity. I just knew that this person was a Christian. I hope you've had that experience, and I hope that you've had the converse experience, that someone has come up to you and said, "You know him, don't you?" That is a very humbling experience. So we have finished the letters of John. The Johannine letters, or Johannine letters. And next lesson, we're going to move to 1 Peter. And we're going to look at the letters of Peter and see how Peter's perspective might vary from John's. So we look forward to being together again when we start our study in 1 Peter. Have a good week.